What's up, Statigo Brothers? This is OuweSok, and in this episode of Broken Pieces, I'll be talking about majors. The first thing, as usual, we look at 15,000 setups, and in this case, we notice a bit of an issue with our sample size, as we see that mirrored positions are not really showing the same values. But okay, we'll just have to deal with that and see what we can find anyway and information from these statistics. The first thing we notice is that the major is really nicely distributed among first, second and third row, really similar values, and only the last row is less popular for placing majors. Still a lot more popular than, for example, kernels, which had a frequency of about 0.1 in the last row, while for majors we see 0.44. So people are more inclined to just place one major in the bottom row, and they're fine with that. If we look at the first row, we see a tendency for the major to be behind the lake. That's a very clear difference between the other six frontline values for frontline positions. This is very different in the second row. In the second row, we see very even distribution of the major over the entire second row. Probably a bit less behind the lake, which is a surprising result. In the third row and in the last row, we see that majors tend to be more close to the center than to the outside. So I think the most interesting result from this is if we look at the positions behind the lake, where your majors appear to be concentrated in the first row and in the third row, and much less in the second row. People probably reserve these spots for their more important pieces like kernels, general, marshal, spy, and prefer to keep their majors in first or second or third row. So what we see is that majors as a frontline piece, and I mean these six positions, if I talk about frontline pieces, is a lot more popular than, for example, the kernel. The kernel had a frequency of about 0.1 as a frontline piece, so one game in 10 you will find a kernel in the front line. And for majors that's 0.36, so you'll find a major in frontline 1 in 3 games, or even a bit more. So it's a very popular frontline piece, and that's easily explained because people like to play captains and lieutenants, and if you're able to capture a captain or a lieutenant with your frontline major without having to scout that piece first, that's a very good deal for your major. You get a lot of value out of your major if you manage to do that. And also majors in first line, they don't have much to fear, as we already know that kernels are just really unlikely to be seen in the first in the front line. So your major is relatively safe as a frontline piece. Probably the biggest enemy of the major is the scout. If your first line major gets scouted, that's a really good deal for your opponent, and it will be very hard for you to get value out of your major. And anytime your major is scouted early, you must realize that the best line of defense for your major is not the piece behind the lake, but it is this 2 square rule. Let's have a look at an example here. For example, this is your setup. Your first row major got scouted in the first turn by your opponent. And I think now you must be aware how to use the 2 square rule to protect your major. For example, I think it would be an error for you to scout this piece now, because if this happens to be another scout, then these 2 spots will now be empty, and the piece that moves out from here to here will have your major trapped in the 2 square rule. So scouting this piece is not a really good idea. Also, moving a piece here or here is probably not optimal, because again, if this piece moves out, your major will be trapped. I think the best move in this position, really simple position, is to move up your major or to move up the scout just one spot. Now if a piece comes out here, you can move your major to the right, to there or to there, oppose this piece, which is probably a piece that you can handle with your major, and your major is relatively safe. It's protected by the 2 square rule for the piece that just came out. You'll probably be able to scout it before it gets really menacing, and your major should be in fine shape. So yeah, I think anytime you are placing a major in first row, try and protect it with the 2 square rule, and I think if you always protect it with general marshal, that's not really the best idea for your first row major. If you place a frontline major, you should be willing to lose it for some material and some information. Actually, there are various players that would be completely happy to drill their major into your position through here or through here after they've been able to capture, for example, lieutenant or captain with it, and they are just willing to blow up their major, lolling into your position, and seeing how much material or information they can get out of your setup. So I think anytime you create a setup, you should be wary that it is proof to rampaging major attacking you here or here. For example, if you look, find these 2 games on YouTube. That's a game of Tobomorix, and it's one of my own games. These are examples of games where a major comes in and deals a lot of damage to the opponent. So make your setups major proof if possible, because you don't know what opponent you find, and maybe it's an opponent that becomes really aggressive with a major, or maybe even a captain, and not willing to drill it into your position. Okay, I think a couple more things about first line majors. Anytime you find a major in the front line from your opponent, you should be able to draw some conclusions about the pieces that are nearby. So for example, if you find a major here, 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 or here, any of these 4 spots, then it becomes more likely that the piece behind the lake is a big piece, so marshal or general. So keep that in mind. And also when you find a major here and here, which is actually a quite interesting position, because there's only 1 piece behind it. Anytime you find a major here and here, you should be able to draw some relatively accurate conclusions about the piece that is behind it. You will be finding here maybe sometimes a marshal or general protecting the major. You'll be quite unlikely to find a colonel or a major, and probably not even a captain here. It would be an unusual setup to have any of those behind a major. Maybe you find a lieutenant, but actually I think it's the most likely piece that you find behind this first line major is a scout or a weak piece like a sergeant. So anytime you find a major here or here, you should make a mental note and try to engage this piece with a sergeant or a lieutenant, and try to not waste a scout on it, because it's probably a very weak piece. Unless of course your opponent is very protective of this piece and keeps it covered up, then it suggests that the piece is actually a general or marshal. But anytime he keeps it exposed, it's probably a very weak piece, and you should try and challenge it with sergeant or lieutenant. The last thing I want to say about your majors is that if you play a relatively low level where people do not really pay attention to where your pieces come from and how you make up your setup, it's probably the best idea to have a major readily available in all of the 3 lanes. So have one here, and one here, to deal with captains that you find from your opponent. Anytime you move up to tougher opponents that try and read your setup and are gold or platinum, and they draw conclusions about pieces they see in your front line, then it probably becomes a good idea to be able to mix it up sometimes and have 2 majors close to each other, and see your opponent misjudge your pieces when they've already found a major, and then you come up with another major and they are probably not pinning that piece correctly. So yeah, spread out your majors when you are relatively low level, and mix it up a little more when you're playing against high level players. So I think that's what I wanted to say about majors for today. Feel free to comment in YouTube or on the forums, and see you there. Bye bye.